actually have a pretty unique and great speaker. I was introduced to her just a couple weeks ago. I'm working with Jeff and Terry at the Parkview offices, and they ran in and said, hey, you know, there's a lady that works with all these Silicon Valley startups, and she's here in Kentucky. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so it turns out she has been here hiding a little bit, but her backstory is pretty interesting, so I don't want to steal the show. But I'd just like to introduce Katie Bush.
Thanks, Adam. Well, like Adam said, my name is Katie Bush, and I am the founder and creative director of KBD, short for Katie Bush Design. We are a design studio that specializes in helping startup companies get their branding, their web, their marketing collateral to help take them to the next level of financing or sales. I have a clicker for that. All right. I'm not from Louisville originally. I'm here via San Francisco. We lived in the Bay Area during the bubble in the 1990s, and I moved from a very nice, cushy job at a design firm as a creative director, and was lured away by a startup company at the time, and lo and behold, 2 months later, it went under. So I took the opportunity to start KBD then. When I got pregnant with my first child, we needed a place to live that didn't cost $3 million, so we ended up moving here to Louisville. But I kept my client base in Silicon Valley, and I've been lucky enough to have it grow pretty much exponentially since then, over the last 10 years or so. Thanks to Skype, frequent flyer miles, and my loving family. Anyway, so for the last 11 years, I've collected quite a stable of clients in Silicon Valley, and I've learned a lot about marketing technology businesses. And I've also gained a unique perspective doing it from here in Louisville. It's really easy to get starry-eyed with what's going on in the Valley right now, especially with the boom that's going on. But the fact of the matter is, you can run a very successful technology company from anywhere, really, these days, especially here in Louisville. We have talent, we have the smarts, we have a burgeoning investment community here. I think the biggest hurdle with, you know, if you're here in Louisville versus in Silicon Valley, is getting noticed. And that is, it's a difficult thing. So how do we bridge that distance between Kentucky and Silicon Valley? Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how young companies can look bigger, brand smarter, and get noticed by customers, by investors, by influencers, or all of the above. By the way, when I talk about brand in this presentation, we're talking about more than just your logo. This is your personality. It's who you convey, who your company is, not just to you, but to the media, to your customers, to your competitors. And if you don't define your brand yourself, it's still going to get defined. It's going to get defined in the marketplace. If you have something out there, your competitors will define it for you if you don't do it yourself. When I first meet with CEOs, my very first question to them is, explain your company to me as if you were speaking to your mother-in-law. And this is actually a really hard question to answer for a lot of CEOs, because a lot of these guys are founder CEOs, and they've come up through, you know, they were technologists, and they built this technology. And they're super excited to tell me all about their technology and everything it does and everything that's great about it. But they can't cull it down to its essence. They have a really hard time getting it down to 2 or 3 sentences. And you really need to be able to do that, because, you know, that's why they call it an elevator pitch. If you get caught in an elevator with the right person, you need to be able to tell them what your company does really quickly. So if you can't do this, now is the time to do it. So how do you go about it? Get your key members in your conference room for like 2 hours and get on the whiteboard and answer these questions. What do we do? That's the mother-in-law question. Try and get it down to 2 or 3 sentences. What does your company do in the simplest of terms? Who is your audience? Who would be using your product or service? And without your product or service, what are their biggest challenges on a day-to-day basis? What are their pain points? And how does your product help them out? How do you benefit them? And then look at your competitive landscape. What are your competitors doing? Are they doing it well? What are they doing wrong? What are you doing better than they are? And possibly one of the harder questions to answer is, what are you not doing as well? What could you improve upon? And what are your hurdles that you need to get over before you can compete in this market? Once these answers right in front of you on the whiteboard, and your team's been there and you've gotten it all together, it's going to be much easier for you to get that marketing message down and get 3 to 5 core messages that you can start weaving in all of your corporate communications. Once you have those core messages, use them everywhere, not just in your marketing materials. Your salespeople should know it. Your receptionists should know it. All of your employees should know it. All of your customers, especially the ones that are already evangelizing your product, they should know it. By the time you get to the point where you're getting media coverage, you should have this story down. And if everybody's using the same story over and over again, now it's not your competitors that are defining who you are. You're controlling the message. And it will lead to a pristine brand with media, with influencers, with investors, and potential customers. And on top of that, this is the key stuff that we need as designers to help you build a visual story that goes with this message. So rule number 2, one of the most important philosophies we have at KBD is that any brand we build should be very specific to that customer's core messages. So this includes logos, websites, PowerPoint decks, any customer-facing material should echo what your company does. And while imitation is the best form of flattery, that does not fit for your brand. I've seen, it's very tempting for companies to see somebody else's brand that's really good and just take that shortcut and utilize it for themselves. But that can be a mistake. Here's a good example of this. This is Insight Communications homepage. They're our cable company. A lot of people use them for the internet. It's pretty. It's white. It's very clean. It's also very familiar. This is Apple's homepage. So you see, when I saw this, the first thing I thought of is there was some executive at Insight that told the web designer, I like Apple, make ours look like Apple. But there's a moral to the story here. You're not Apple. Apple spends millions of dollars and has hundreds of the best designers in the world working on their product. You're not Apple. You should be marketing your product, and it will be a stronger brand if you think it as your core message, not Apple's. On a bootstrap budget, there's a lot of startups out there that are looking to crowdsourcing sites to get their logo. Now if you're not familiar, crowdsourcing sites, there's one called 99 Designs, for example, where for $99, you can provide the name of your company, a little bit of information, and a few days later, you get fed back 99 potential logos for your company. And that sounds like a good deal from the outset. You're like, oh, I got 99 choices, it looks great, I'm just gonna get this one. But in the end, what happens is you're gonna have to come back to somebody like me to redesign your brand eventually. The problem is, without information, a designer is blind. You need to have, beyond the name of your company, these crowdsourcing sites usually just give these jobs to young, green, typically non-English speaking designers who are just trying, and they'll end up giving you sometimes some very nice artwork, but it doesn't resonate to your particular message. And in the end, you're going to end up having to go back and redo your brand, which is a bigger investment than it would be to do it the right way in the first place. You multiply that by 99 designers swinging a bat, and eventually maybe one of them will hit the piñata, but probably not. So while we're talking about logos, I wanted to mention, this is one of my favorite clients. This is a little company called Rockmelt. They've invented a new browser that embeds Facebook and Twitter and any site that has an RSS feed right in the browser window. So you don't actually have to leave the browser to check and see what's going on. It's a great company. You should check it out and download it if you haven't already. But the reason I bring it up is these guys have a really nice logo. I have to say, the logo itself, I didn't do it, but it's a successful logo because it does tell their story. You know, they're breaking out, they're breaking the mold, they're doing something different. However, we're working with them right now. Their market is mostly 20-somethings. And so a lot of the stuff we're doing for them is, American Apparel deep VTs and water bottles and hats. The hat that we just did, in order to embroider this logo on a hat, it's 17 colors. And in order to get this on a water bottle, we had to spend a good deal of time trying to find a way to convert this logo to work in white only on a red bottle. And it was very difficult, and they actually had to invest a lot of money with me to convert the logo to make it work in all these applications. So the reason I mention it is if you're getting started with a design firm and you're looking to build a logo, just be aware of how you're going to use it in the future, because it can be expensive if it doesn't work in one color. So just keep that in mind. Sidebar. One of the biggest challenges for a small startup, particularly the ones in the enterprise space, where the barriers to entry are higher and it's much harder to get a big company who's potentially using Cisco or Oracle for their current vendor, to get them to go to a smaller guy and to convince them to make that leap of faith to use somebody else. And however, if you don't do that, you're going to die in the water. You have to be able to attract these big companies to use you. So how do you do that? And it's really all about perception. If you act bigger, you will seem bigger to these guys. And acting bigger, the easiest way to do that is to have a really polished, professional brand. And when I say that, it's not just having a nice logo or having a nice website. It's every touch point that the customer might see. It's having nice, heavy cardstock for your business cards. It's having really good data sheets. It's investing in the packaging of your product. And if you look at it that way, at every single place that the customer could see you, they're only seeing the good stuff. They're never going to see that guy behind the curtain, the rinky-dink guy. They're only going to see the great and powerful Oz, which is what you want. And that's how you're going to be able to compete with the bigger guys. You guys might recognize this name. Andreessen Horowitz is now one of the top venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. And this may or may not be the best example here, but I'm going to tell the story because it's good. Because they've never really been on a bootstrap budget. But they are, believe it or not, they are a startup. And when I first started working for them, it was just Ben and Mark and me. And we were sitting around a table, and I was asking Mark the same questions that I was just talking about earlier in this presentation about his brand and what he wanted to do. And his answer was, Katie, have you ever seen the movie American Psycho? And there's a scene in American Psycho, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie or not, where all these guys are sitting around the table and they're busting out their business cards. And it's these guys in Wall Street in the 80s. And one guy throws his out, and the next guy's is just a little bit better paper and nicer printing, and the next guy's is even better. And Mark said to me, he's like, I always want to have the best business card on the table. And I immediately read between the lines. He wasn't just talking about his business card, he was talking about his entire brand. These guys have thought big from the very beginning. They wanted to do something different in Silicon Valley. They wanted to create a venture capital firm that was going to help founder CEOs, not just with money, but with advice and mentoring and giving them talent and all sorts of things. So they've invested a lot of money in keeping a really pristine brand, and you can see it in everything they do. It carried through to the stuff we've done, from their business cards, by the way, are 220-pound letterpress cardstock. They're as thick as a shingle. But they carry it through their office space is pristine. They have super hot receptionists. They're very nice to their portfolio companies. Everything they do is about their brand. And now they're one of the top, 3 or 4 venture capital firms in the Valley, and they're less than 2 years old. And everybody knows who they are. And it's all about perception. They started thinking big from the beginning. Sue Kitchen is a little more realistic example of thinking big. This is another one of my clients out in the Bay Area. They take gourmet food, and mostly women are able to order it online, and they can order a week's worth of food for their families and have it delivered to their office. This is an interesting play because they're not marketing to the consumer. They're actually marketing to businesses. So they work with The Gap and Apple and Genentech and all of these bigger companies, and then those companies offer it as a benefit to their employees. So from the very beginning, it's 2 women, and they have a bunch of college kids that work there. It's a really small little shop, but we branded it big. So they have a beautiful logo, they have a beautiful kitchen space, they have a really nice website. Everything is high end with these guys. And time again, they've been asked, oh, I thought you were a nationwide chain. They're not. They're just one little shop in San Carlos, California. But this year, they were selected as one of the top growing women-owned companies in Silicon Valley, and that includes technology companies. So it's all about perception. Rule number 4, go guerrilla. The key here is knowing your audience and knowing where they are, and then being creative about venues to reach them. There's a lot of talk about social networking right now, Facebook and Twitter and all of those things. And those can indeed be a really good, inexpensive venue to reach your audience. But you have to think about, is your audience using those vehicles for business? Or are they just on it to post photos of their kids? So think about your audience and think about the best ways to reach them and be creative about other ways that you might be able to get in touch with them. One of my clients, Viata, is a master of doing guerrilla marketing. They have a product, it's an open source networking product, and their market is the Uber geeks. Not just the geeks, these are the Uber geeks. And they knew it. And when we first built their website, they had this whole community area, because it's an open source product. The geeks would get on and they'd start talking to each other, and they proclaimed themselves the Viata Secret Society. And immediately the marketing guy's like, oh, we got to work on this. So he gave these guys t-shirts, and we branded the Secret Society, and now 7 years later there are a nationwide series of local chapters of the Viata Secret Society that meet regularly at bars. So it was amazing marketing, and they didn't have to do a thing except make a few t-shirts. Similarly, the same company, when they were first starting out, they really wanted to go to the Java One conference. And they were looking to get a booth, and it was going to be very expensive, take up their entire budget for the year. And they just couldn't pull it off. But this was their market, and they really wanted to get to these guys. So instead, they rented a bar across the street, a room kind of like this, and they got a bunch of arcade machines, vintage arcade machines, Pac-Man and Galaga and those sorts of things. And they filled the room with these machines, and then we made these postcards and stood outside the Java One conference and started handing them out. And they had a huge turnout and got way more leads than they would have if they were just lost on this huge show floor in a 10 by 10 booth for a lot less money. So a lot of it is just thinking out of the box. So here are my 4 golden rules for startups. Get your story down pat and make sure everybody in your organization is using the same messages. Make your brand yours, not somebody else's, and make sure that when you build out your brand from every touch point, that it is speaking to your core messages. Also, act bigger than you are. Make sure that all of the places that your customers are seeing are top-notch. Act like you're big, and you will be big. And finally, get out of the box. I would be remiss here if I didn't give myself a shameless plug. Katie Bush Design is right up the street. We're here, we're in the Highlands, and we have been doing this a really long time. And if any of you are interested in talking to us about how we might be able to help you, please let me know. Thanks a lot.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
Anybody?
I'll be the guinea pig. What do you charge some brand new companies coming to work with you to get some type of design overhaul?
It really depends on, we do it by project, so it really depends on what we're doing. Typically it's $150 an hour, but it breaks down into, for a website, for example, I always tell my clients, a website is kind of like buying a car. And you can get it in a number of different models, depending on how fancy you want to be. You can get a Ford Fiesta or you can get a Lamborghini. And it's about that same price range for websites. Logos, again, it's, a lot of it depends on how intricate we get and how many hours we put into it. So it's a hard question to answer directly, but I don't know if I dodged that well enough or not.
If you need a new resource, new talent, where do you go? Do you start here? Do you start in Silicon Valley? Do you start in Bulletin boards?
We're actually hiring right now. you know, I have a decent enough network out in Silicon Valley that I can put the word out, and if I need freelancers, I typically pull from there. But I'm also trying to get a lot more people here. We have a core group of people here in our office in Louisville, and I found that it's nice to have the face-to-face contact with people who are working for us. So we have an ad on LGDA right now. So let me know if you're looking.
Do you get involved in trying to get the answers to the whiteboard questions, or do you leave that strictly up to the company?
No, actually, that's part of our process when we're doing a brand. We call them a messaging workshop, and we'll sit down and take you through all of those different steps and get everything together for you, and then deliver a document back that would act as our creative platform for actually building out the brand. Thanks so much for coming.